Well, good morning. Good to be with everyone today. Hope everybody's doing good. And, once again, as usual, we sure are missing everyone. Monday, I talked about learning to love yourself in Christ and how we so often um, we fail to do that. We fail to realize that Christ loves us, and we fail to embrace who we are in Christ, who He created us to be. But today, I want to look at a hard one, something that's hard for everyone, and it's forgiving ourselves. Many times we may forgive others, we may can let things go with others, but we struggle. Many people struggle with forgiving themselves, and let's be honest, that's one of the tools that the enemy uses against us. If he can hold the things of our past over our head, then he can keep us in bondage. And we've got to realize that if God has forgiven us, then we need to forgive ourselves. Listen, I've made mistakes in my life, and there's been many things that I've looked back on and thought, man, what in the world was I thinking? Um, but we can't dwell on those things. There's times when things will come up that maybe I need to do, and I think, man, I remember I really messed this up last time. How am I going to do this now? And the fact is, we've got to learn to forgive ourselves so that we can move forward in what God wants us. We got to realize that if God has forgiven us, if Christ has forgiven us, then why can't we forgive ourselves? And I think about in John chapter 21, verse 15 through 19 says, so when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he asked him the third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you dressed yourself and walked where you desired. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. He said this, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. When he had said this, he said to him, follow me. I think about this. Peter was a lot of times I feel me and Peter would have probably gotten along. Peter was a man who a lot of times spoke before he thought. He was quick to answer. And remember, before Jesus was crucified, before he went to the garden to pray, before he was arrested, the night of the Last Supper with the disciples, Jesus told Peter, he said, listen, before the rooster crows in the morning, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter rejected that. He said, no, 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 it won't be. I'll follow you even to death. And we know the story as Jesus was arrested and led away to be judged. Peter ended up denying him 3 times. And so I'm sure as Jesus is talking to Peter here, Jesus has already been crucified. He's been resurrected. He's walked on the earth for several days, and he's talking to Peter here. I'm sure Peter had a sense of unforgiveness for himself on him, and Jesus saw that. Jesus probably saw that Peter didn't feel adequate enough. Peter had that looming thought in the back of his mind, I said I'd never deny him, but I did. And as Jesus talked to him, I'm sure Peter had a doubt to himself. God, Lord, I can't do what you've told me to do. I thought I wouldn't deny you, but yet I've denied you. And I'm sure the devil kept throwing that up at Peter. And so Jesus has set Peter down, and he's talking to him. He says, listen, Peter, do you love me? Peter tells him, he said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, feed my lambs. He asked him again. He said, Peter, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, tend my sheep. He said it a third time. Peter got upset. But I wondered if Peter's mind looked to the fact that, I denied him 3 times and now he's asked me this 3 times. But I think Jesus was trying to show him, listen, Peter, in spite of what you've done, in spite of the sin you've committed, in spite of your wrongdoings, the underlying question is, do you love me? And when Peter said yes, Jesus said, feed my sheep, tend my lambs, Feed my sheep, Peter. Each time he said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Then feed my sheep. In other words, don't worry about what you've done, Peter. What you've done's in the past. Listen, what we've done's in the past, whether right or wrong, there's no changing it. You can't change the things that are done. Once they're done, they're done. If God has forgiven us, then we can forgive ourselves. And that's what Peter's saying here. I mean, Jesus is telling Peter, listen, I'm telling you to feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes. Peter said, yes, I love you. Then feed my sheep. Don't worry about everything that's been done. That's done. It's over with. I've died on a cross for that. I paid the penalty for it. Don't worry about it. Just feed my sheep. He had one thing set aside for Peter to do. Feed my sheep. I don't know where you're at today. Maybe you've got something looming in your past that just keeps coming up to haunt you. I want to ask you the same question today. As Jesus asked Peter, do you love the Lord? If the answer is yes, stop worrying about everything you've done in the past. God already paid a price. God's cleaning up. Stop worrying about it. Feed his sheep. That's what he tells us here. If you love me, feed my sheep. Don't worry about those things. When the enemy starts to bring up the past and the things you've done in the past, listen, just tell him, I love the Lord. It's done and over with. There's nothing I can do about it. Don't keep yourself down. Many people miss out on ministry opportunities. They skip out on their calling because they feel they're not adequate enough. Listen, the fact is none of us are adequate enough. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. None of us reaches the point of the glory of God. We fall short of it every single day. Every one of us has fallen short of the glory of God. But by Jesus being exalted and lifted upon that cross and dying for our sin, he has brought us to the place of God's glory. We fall short, but through him, we can achieve what God has called us to do. God knows we fall short, and yet in spite of us, our shortfallings, God says, I called you anyway. So I encourage you today, stop worrying about the things that are done in the past. There's nothing you can do about them. Stop worrying about those. Look forward to Christ. And if Christ has called you, don't let anything else determine whether or not you will do God's will. If you love him, feed his sheep. If you love him, do his will. Don't worry about those things because he loves you in spite of those things. He didn't reject Peter. Matter of fact, Peter was forgiven. And that's what this is signifying. Listen, Peter, I've forgiven you. Feed my sheep. Forgive yourself. And I encourage you today, forgive yourself. Find a way to forgive yourself. Give it to God. If God has forgiven you, it's forgiven. Don't worry about it any longer. You can't change it. But what we can do is move forward from this moment on. We don't live in the past. We can't change the past. All we can do is live for today and set our sights on what God has in store for us today. And tomorrow morning when we wake up, we'll live for that day and we'll set our sights on the goals and the prizes that God has in store for us that day. We love you. We consider it a blessing as usual to be here with you. And I pray that you have a blessed day. I pray today, listen, focus on that. Forgive yourself. God's forgiven you.